Hello, today we are going to demonstrate BryteFlow Ingest replication from SAP APIs using ODP extractors on CDS views to Azure Synapse as a destination. So as you can see, this is the BryteFlow Ingest web application, which is installed on a VM and running as a Java web app. And all we need to do is a step-by-step, three-step process, basically where you connect your source destination and choose your objects for replication. And thereafter you begin with the replication here. So we're going to start with the source database connectivity. And we're going to choose SAP CDS View OData as our connector here, which is going to connect to SAP application. We need to provide the respective port client and the user details. If the SAP application is SSL enabled, we can just have this checkbox for SSL enabled. Currently, we're not using an SSL enabled connection, so it's not required. And sorry, we'll just do a test connection. If the connectivity is all tested okay, that means BryteFlow can connect to the API for reading the data. So we're all good here. Moving on to the destination, you can see the Azure Synapse SQL is selected as the preferred destination. There are several others as well, like Azure ADLS2, which is the blob, and BryteFlow will load the Parquet files onto the ADLS2. For Synapse SQL, all we need is the database host, username, password, and the port details. So this uses JDBC connection to upload data onto Synapse SQL. So now, at the similar manner, we need to sort out the connectivity between the BryteFlow server and Azure Synapse as well. Once that is done, it means we are good to start the replication. And we need to select our object. So we move on to Data tab and select our object. So this will bring up all the ODP enabled services for our selection and replication. So these are these objects there, and then we get to choose which objects we want to take over to Synapse. So there are several already replicating, and when we go within the CDS views, this brings up the entire column list, and on hover we see the business names as well, and the same business names will then be created in the view on Synapse. Now there are a few object level options available for replication, and this is mainly for defining the delta extract, which is the type 1 SCD and the type 2, which comes along with the history. So when we choose any of these, it defines how data will appear on Synapse. So when we say by primary key, which is the type 1 SCD, where the data is like for like, exact replica of the source. Whereas if we say primary key with history, that means it's going to maintain the type 2 SCD history on the destination. It's a Synapse SQL, which comes along with a few additional columns of start date and end date for each record, and also the historical value appearing. Additional masking option available here for at column level, where we can mask the PII columns if we don't want to replicate any confidential information. That you can just choose those columns to mask, and these will never replicate on the destination side. Now you can filter the data from the source as well. So this is just in the where tab where we can say to filter out so and so columns here. That means, from when pulling the data from the source side, it, filter condition gets applied and only the required records get replicated onto the destination. A few optional features here are skip initial and redo initial. So that means when, in order to begin with the CDC, there we need to do the first initial extract. And in case if there is a requirement where we want to skip the initial load, you get to do that at the table level. And in case you want to repeat the initial load and redo only certain objects, so in that case, redo initial needs to be just selected this way, and the action can be performed. So as you can see, we are replicating a couple of CDS view. So now we can select as many from the list, and all of them will then follow a defined schedule. So after the first full load, the deltas will happen as per the periodic schedule. You can have a daily, hourly, or a minute option specified in the schedule as well. And so we'll begin with the first full load by clicking on full extract. And the progress can be seen in the log tab, where you can see all the URLs of the API calls being called, and the full extract has now begun. You can see it is extracting the service, getting the data, and just fetched 174 records for customer master, and then moves on to the loading part where it's creating the table, loading, and the table is now loaded. Then the same goes on for the second CDS view, and it just loaded both of them. So we can go to now view data in Synapse SQL. Connected to Azure Synapse database, which is set up as the destination, and we'll query the objects that were created by Ingest. Here, the table got created. So these are the two services that we extracted from SAP. You can see 174 records fetched for which is matching the Synapse, and you can see all the columns have come like for like onto the destination. And going forward, it since the schedule is left turned on, it gets on to the delta mode, and it will extract the data, and if any changes, it will just fetch and upsert it onto the same table on the destination. So there's no additional code that is need to be done when using BryteFlow Ingest for Synapse. Now there are a few additional options that we can see here, which is sync new, sync struct, and a rollback. Now sync new is when you already have certain objects selected in your data pipeline and you want to include more objects going forward. So that you can do by stopping the schedule, coming and choosing those objects here, and then just doing a sync new. So in that case, it will just do the first initial load for the newly selected CDS views and leave the previous ones untouched. So they all follow the same delta schedule after that. So just synchronizing the new ones in the pipeline. Sync struct is for any schema changes that happens going forward after the replication is happening, and some columns get added onto the CDS views. You can just do a sync struct to synchronize the destination as well. Rollback is to replay the transaction. So in this case, it will just go back in time and fetch the delta records from the previous delta extract. So as you can see, it maintains a delta timestamp, which is like behaves like a delta token, and you can always go back, uh, and as long as that is retained in the SAP, it fetches data from that particular time to the current time. So usually in case of any network failures or any um, errors, you have an option to do a rollback of the incremental loads. So that pretty much covers the BryteFlow ingest. The few additional bits is probably not relevant for all the type of destinations, but yeah, it does support different file formats and compression, and the type 2 columns like effective date and end date are configurable here as well. Now, once the data has landed here, we also want to see the views that get quickly show you the views created on Synapse. So after the first full load, the Synapse also creates views, and that's under the same when we where the tables are created, there's a view created on top of the table where we get the business names appended to the technical names here for more meaningful column description, because SAP column names are quite technical, which does not make sense to the end user. And the view, by creating the view, we allow the same data to have a meaningful column name. We select from the view and see the same data but with the meaningful name, like store underscore KUNNR, where KUNNR is the technical name, and then the same with all the columns. So this is more a meaningful representation of the SAP table in the form of view. And the same goes on for all the objects. You can see here there's a view corresponding to each table with the data, and column names appears to be more meaningful. Other service as well, coming as the business name along with the technical name for each column, and the number of rows. The background table remains the same, so the same data you get to see with the more meaningful column names for the users. So yeah, that pretty much covers and summarizes our BryteFlow Ingest demo for SAP CDS views to Azure Synapse SQL. Thank you.